So we say, I believe. Today we're going to find out what I believe means. It's about relationships. You know, a relationship isn't something that you can put your finger on and say, there it is. It seems kind of like a spiritual thing. And because you can't really see it, it needs action. Action reveals relationships. There's some things I love about some of these pictures. This one is particularly interesting. See, it's just two fingers, and somebody's drawn a hug on there. But notice what the two fingers are doing. You know, when you make a promise and you do this, what does it mean? So this is like John's gospel. He has a lot of double meanings and things, and that's kind of one of those. And this horse, are they fighting or are they kissing, or what are they doing? We don't know. But you can tell there's something going on. There's some sort of relationship there. And I love these little kids and the lion. But this one, can I have a couple of volunteers just to come and stand up here? Iris is brave. We got another one? One more. You can't have a relationship with one person, right? All right. So you just stand right in front. Right here is good. Right here. This is good. Wherever you want. Right there. All right. Now I want you to stand apart from each other. All right. So what does that say to you? Don't look at each other.
We're waiting for a bus now.
Just like that, right?
Ignore
It's like these two people, right? Yeah, they're waiting for a bus. And it's interesting that you'd say that, because when you're waiting for a bus, there's no relationship. It's like on an elevator, you're too close together, so you really got to not look at each other. All right, now I want you to move close. And you notice what happens here? What would you say happened right there?
Smile.
What?
They looked at each other and smiled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. We would.
Is there a relationship going on there?
They're waiting for the same bus.
There we go.
Did you see that one where they took pictures of strangers?
No, there's pictures of strangers.
It's relationships again.
Yeah. Okay. So we can tell if a relationship is happening, and actually the depth of the relationship. This distance is kind of, I'm embarrassed, so I don't want to get too close to you. But we're still friends and all this. But if she were to put her arms around her and give a hug, because they're very good friends. Now we say something, you see something else, don't we? All right, you go sit down, thanks. So when they're sitting in the pews, you can't tell they have a relationship. But when they're standing like here and here, except they're kind of embarrassed, they actually want to look at each other, you can't tell there's a relationship. But when they do something, you can tell there's a relationship. And in fact, this is true for animals as well. I was working on this sermon. It was like really a boring sermon. I had to kind of pump it up. And I was, God, what am I going to do with this thing? And so I went for my walk. You know, I always go for a walk in the morning. And I went through the park into the men's restroom, and there was these bugs. They looked like mosquitoes, but they were bigger. And there were two of them, and they were attached, and they were flying around together. And I thought, okay, these two bugs have a relationship. Well, then the two bugs separated and sat apart from each other, and this one up here is like vibrating like crazy, and this one down here is a little bit, and then stopped. But this one's going, I'm like, ooh, what's that about? And then another one came and started vibrating even more down here, and this one stopped. There's some kind of bug relationship going on here. I don't get. It's like living in a different country. You have no idea what the culture is. But you can tell that something is going on. There's a relationship between these bugs, even if you don't know what it is. Isn't that interesting? Everything seems to have a relationship, but you just have to see it. It's the same thing with God. How does God demonstrate His relationship with us? He's not visible to us. He's designed our senses in such a way we can't see the spirit world. How do we see what's happening? Well, He's told us that it's like the wind. You can't see the wind, but you can see what it does. It's the same thing with relationships that we have. It's the same thing with the relationship with God. You can't see Him, but you can see what He's doing. And that's why Jesus performed miracles. There was no mistaking that these supernatural phenomena that Jesus was doing were coming from God. And because of the nature of the miracles, he was healing people and helping people, they began to understand the nature of God's relationship to us. He loves us. That was the point of Jesus' miracles. They demonstrated God's love. And it was like a mighty wind. We could say it's like a tornado that went through Jerusalem. After he cleansed the temple, apparently he was going around doing all kinds of miracles. Like a tornado rushing through Jerusalem. People were being healed and seeing God at work through this strange man from Galilee. Who was he? Who was this great wind blowing through Jerusalem? Well, let's take a look at our passage, John 2, 21 to 3, verse 2. Now, this is a transition passage, and I haven't seen any sermon on this in all my looking at commentaries and sermons and all this, because they skip right to Nicodemus. But it seemed to me when I was looking at this, there were three groups there, and I want you to notice them, and we're going to be talking about them. Does everybody have it? John 2:21 to 3:2. I'm reading from the Holman and the Pew Bible. But he was speaking about the sanctuary of his body. You know, he talked about being raised in 3 days. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the statement Jesus had made. While he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many trusted in his name when they saw the signs he was doing. Jesus, however, would not entrust himself to them, since he knew them all. And because he did not need anyone to testify about man, for he himself knew what was in man. Now there was a man from the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to him at night and said, "Rabbi, we know you have come from God as a teacher, for no one could perform these signs you do unless God were with him." So, you see those three groups that relate to Jesus? The disciples believed. They believed that Jesus was the Messiah. They believed the scriptures and the words that Jesus said, that he was the Son of God. They knew him. And after the resurrection, they understood who he really was, that he was God in the flesh. The disciples believed. The people believed, it says. An audience was around Jesus doing all these things. An audience. These people didn't know him. The disciples knew him. These people, they didn't know him. He was some strange guy from Galilee. But they believed that Jesus was the Messiah. They didn't know what that meant. They thought that he was going to be a ruler. They thought that God gave this man special powers. They didn't know that he was God. They thought this was given to him and he was a normal man. The religious leaders, they did not believe. They saw his miracles, didn't know what that meant. Was this from God or was this from the devil? We hear in other Gospels that by the time that they were going to crucify him, they were saying that what he was doing was from the devil. They didn't know where this was coming from, but they had to find out. What was it? So we have three groups, and so we have three qualities of belief. Now, I hope this doesn't get too complicated for you there. The visual is a little complicated with the picture behind it. Jesus' disciples had this relationship with Jesus. They loved Jesus, they believed him, they trusted him. Jesus trusted them. Remember, he knew Nathanael, and he said, "There's no deceit in this man. What you see is what you get with Nathanael." And apparently that was similarly true with the disciples. Jesus trusted them. So they trusted each other because they had a love relationship. They knew Jesus. They were from the same area. Some of them may have been his relatives even, his disciples. certainly his friends. They were intimately acquainted. They trusted him. They had a love relationship no matter what happened or what strange or even disappointing things he did. They believed in him because they had a relationship. The people in Jerusalem didn't have a relationship with Jesus. They believed in his name. That meant they believed he was the Messiah. They didn't know him. They had just experienced his miracles. They believed the signs he was doing. It says they believed him or trusted him, but Jesus didn't trust them. It's because they only believed in his miracles. They didn't know him. Do you remember the story of the farmer sowing seed? That parable that Jesus taught? Where the farmer's throwing seed around that lands in weeds, and it lands in the road, and it lands in good soil. Well, this is the people who are the weeds in the road. They don't know him. They're only interested in the miracles. And you know how memories are. When they went back home, they began to rationalize what they'd seen and decided that Jesus was a trickster. Jesus knew this was going to happen because he knew people and he knew what was in us. He knew, in fact, that they would turn on him when he no longer was going to be a ruler that conquered Rome. He knew they'd turn on him when their expectations weren't met. Sounds kind of familiar. When we expect God to do something and he doesn't do it, we begin to doubt. And that's exactly what we have in these audience people around Jesus. The religious leaders, the rulers of the Sanhedrin, they had no relationship with Jesus whatsoever. Now, I told you last week that the people, the priests who had set up this market in the temple that Jesus chased out of there were part of a gang that the high priest Anna had set up. It was called Anna's Bazaar. And they were corrupt priests. Well, apparently not all of them were like that. Apparently many of them were still very serious about their religion and wanted to worship God. And Nicodemus apparently was one of these. And apparently his faction wanted to find out who Jesus was. So they sent him there. They were seeking the truth, you see. They saw the miracles, didn't know what it meant. They wanted to know what it meant. It's because they didn't know him, like the disciples did, and they needed to understand. I think this was pretty wise and prudent because they were responsible for the people's religious welfare. They didn't want someone preaching another God and leading the people astray, so they wanted to make sure what this Jesus was doing. This is what they should have been doing. And so Nicodemus appropriately went for an interview to Jesus. So we have three qualities then that come from these relationships with these three groups. The disciples know him personally, so they love and trust him. The people who experience what he does, they don't know him personally. Their belief is conditional on what they expect. The religious leaders, they need to learn more about him. They don't know him, they're skeptical. As they should be. So what does I believe mean? We have three different groups, three different kinds of I believe. Now the Holman, our Pew Bible, has it right. The word that a lot of translations translate to believe here is the word trust. And so there's a play on words here in these verses, 23 and 24. It says, many trusted in his name when they saw the signs he was doing. Jesus, however, would not entrust himself to them. It's interesting how John likes to play with words. Jesus knew them all. He knew that relationships determine trust. So, Iris and Patsy would not have hugged each other up here if they didn't trust each other. Can you see that? And when you're waiting for a bus, you're not going to approach someone unless you're very brave, because you don't trust them. Trust. And, okay, let's look at these people. Jesus wasn't stupid. It says he knew what was in man. He wasn't stupid. trust a pack of strangers who don't know you. I'm an actor, right? I worked in theater. And it's the same true, actually, for pastors. We have this phrase, don't trust your audience. Don't believe your audience. Because they're going to be praising you when you do great, and they're going to be criticizing you when you do bad. Don't trust them. Don't believe either one, or you'll go crazy. Jesus didn't trust his audience. They didn't have a relationship with him. He didn't have a relationship with them. He knew their hearts. He knew what they were going to do. Whether supernaturally or just anybody would have this kind of sense that you don't go trusting these people. But Jesus did trust his disciples, you notice, because he had a relationship with them. And sometimes they praised him and sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they were pretty critical with him. But he trusted them. And you know what? The disciples would have kept trusting Jesus if he had never done another miracle, because they knew him. The religious leaders, they really didn't trust Jesus. There have been other phony messiahs, and after Jesus there were many more. These men were wise not to trust Jesus. But Jesus really didn't trust them either, because he knew that they would begin to oppose him when they begin to realize that he was claiming to be God. He knew that was going to happen. I mean, it just makes sense, even if you don't have supernatural knowledge. You got people who have Almighty God, one God, monotheism religion, and here you got this guy, and he's going to start claiming to be God. And the Old Testament tells them that they must stone someone like that. So Jesus, it's set up. He knew what was going to happen. So Nicodemus came to him at night. We got this gang, Annas' Bazaar, those people. Nicodemus didn't want to jeopardize his position. There's a couple of reasons why he might have come at night. One is he wanted to stay away from these people and not get involved with some kind of problem with them, because they were like this mob, this cabal or cartel or something. But also, what's really interesting is that the rabbis considered the nighttime the perfect time for concentrating on the Lord and for learning. And so Nicodemus was coming at night for probably those two reasons, because he wanted to learn what Jesus had to say about God. But it's very interesting as we study it now. We're going to be going through his teaching to Nicodemus in the next few weeks. Jesus keeps his cards close to his chest. He doesn't come right out and say stuff, even though he knows that Nicodemus needs to understand. Nicodemus remains skeptical all the way through this dialogue that's coming up until he's convinced. You see, with him, believing is a mental thing. It isn't so much a relationship thing, it's a mental thing with Nicodemus. Okay, because of the three qualities of relationship now, we have three levels of trust. Have you noticed? If you have a love relationship between Jesus and his disciples, it results in trust. If you have no relationship, but you have some experiences, like his miracles, the people trusted him, but he didn't trust them. And you got to have trust both ways to really call it trust. With the religious leaders, there's no relationship whatsoever, and there was no trust, just a skeptical desire to learn. Notice what's going on here. Trust comes out of a love relationship. If you have a love relationship with someone, you have difficulties. You have hardships. You disappoint each other completely. But if there's a love relationship, that bond keeps you together, keeps drawing you together. I can see this is really appropriate today. I had no idea. You continue to trust one another. But when trust is broken, love has a difficult time, because that relationship of trust depends on the love relationship. You see? They go together. And if you break the one, the other is difficult. But this this love relationship is really hard to hide. As you notice, when they first came up here, they initially wanted to react to each other and to enjoy each other's company up here in front of you and be embarrassed together. It was very difficult for them to hide the relationship. You notice I had to kind of push them apart, make them not look at each other. You remember that? Love relationship is hard to hide, as a lot of teenagers discover in high school. I remember we were at camp, I think, and we wanted to hold hands, but we didn't want anybody to know, and so we'd hold hands under the hymn book. Everyone. You can't hide that. You just stand closer together, for one thing. When you say, I believe, what you're saying is, I believe in you. I believe in you. And when you say, I believe in you, you act like it. You act like you believe in me. So, what relationship do you have with God? Getting real personal now. Are you like Nicodemus? You know a lot about Christianity? Go to church, perform all the rituals, you do the Lord's Prayer and the doxology, and you do the whole thing, you go through it. But you don't know God personally? Is that you? Is that like Nicodemus? That God is somehow remote? Somehow He doesn't seem to be involved in your life? You don't seem to have a relationship with Him. It's kind of a head thing with you. You've signed on to the list of things you're supposed to believe, and you said, yeah, I believe that. That's the way Nicodemus was. If you're like Nicodemus, you're honest, but you're wary. But you still want to know. You still seek the truth. It's not a bad place to be. It's a good place to be. It's just not all the way yet, because you don't have that relationship if you're like Nicodemus. How about, are you like the audience? Jesus' audience watching His miracles. You believe God is working. You see Him at work in people's lives. And you even pray. But do you know God personally? Do you know Him like your best friend or like your spouse, the way you know them? Do you know God like that? Is there this bond between you, would you say? Because if you're just the audience, you will probably stop believing when He doesn't meet your expectations. So you pray for healing, and it doesn't happen. Well, either God is dead, or He doesn't have the power, or He doesn't care. That would be the audience's reaction. I remember my daughter when she was in, sorry, Becca, when she was in middle school, and God didn't answer her prayer, and she was really disappointed in Him. And I don't know that she stopped believing at that time, but it got kind of remote from what I could tell. That's the audience. You're watching what goes on, but you don't have a personal relationship. You don't have a love relationship with God. And that's the kind of people, sometimes they come to churches that are really a spectator church. They go to the church with the best show. Either they stop going to church, or they go to these churches where they get entertained because it's good music, and they get to feel good about themselves because the preacher does some pop psychology thing, teaches them how to change your diaper or something, and whatever. That's the audience. And when it isn't fun anymore, they'll stop believing. In fact, some of the churches have discovered this is what's happening, some of the contemporary service churches. And so they begun to try to make disciples that love God out of the people who are only coming In Kenya, they call them butterfly Christians. They'd flip to the best show in town. But if you have a love relationship with God, it's nice to go to a church like that, but you can worship God in a church that just sings hymns, even if you don't like hymns. We like hymns here, I guess. It doesn't really matter what the service is like as much as your relationship with God, because you sense his presence there. You have a love relationship with him. That's a disciple. And you're a friend of God because he first loved you, it says. You love him as a response to his love for you. So, what does I believe mean? It means I believe in you. I love you. And you notice this illustration can go either way. It's God speaking to you or you speaking to God. No matter what comes between you and God, the love is still there. You might be disappointed, you might be hurt. You might wonder, where on earth is he? But you still trust him because you love him and you know he loves you. You can feel it in your heart. You've got that kind of relationship. Now, I heard an interesting sarcastic joke the other day. It was at a conference, and it was referring to contemporary worship music, and the guy called it, "Jesus is my boyfriend music." I think it's pretty funny. I was commenting on our hymns, how they seem like they're love songs. And they are love songs. It's a funny joke, but it's absolutely true. These songs, both many of our hymns and the contemporary worship songs, are love songs to Jesus and to God. Because our relationship with him feels intimate like that. We feel intimate with God. Is it any wonder that the church is called the bride of Christ in Revelations? It's a love relationship. And so amazing. This religion, Christianity, isn't based on mythologies. Stories have been made up. It's not based on philosophy or a list of creeds. It's not based on that. We can sign on to that, but it's not based on that. It's based on trust. And trust, like Nicodemus will find out, it's based on historical facts. Things actually happened that are in the Gospels. They actually happened. It's real, it's true, it's a historical fact, it's been proved. If you use normal historical research methods. And it's based on God's quiet, gentle voice in your heart saying, I love you. How can we really believe that? How can we really believe that God loves me? How can you get that love relationship with Almighty God? How can you tear off the little slip of paper and say it's mine and put it in your pocket? How can we accept God's love and enter into a relationship with him? Well, Jesus is going to explain this to Nicodemus. And I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to wait a couple weeks. And no fair reading ahead.